My coworkers teased me for eating lunch with the lonely janitor. Every day for 11 years. At his funeral, his lawyer pulled me aside and said, "Mr. Wilson left this for you." The attorney handed me a shoebox in a church parking lot on a Saturday morning, and I remember thinking it was too light. Whatever Charles had left me couldn't weigh more than a pound, maybe less. I shook it gently before I opened it, the way you shake a present when you're trying not to hope too hard. I didn't open it right there. I drove home with it sitting in the passenger seat like a person, seatbelt looped across the flap, and I kept glancing at it the entire 40-minute drive. When I finally pulled into my driveway and sat in my car with the engine off, I noticed the tape on the corner, yellowed, slightly lifting. Someone had taped that box closed a long time ago. He'd known for a while what he was putting in there. I didn't cry until page 3 of his notebook. Then I cried for about an hour. Then I put the box in my hall closet, ate half a sleeve of crackers for dinner, and spent the rest of the weekend staring at the ceiling. By Sunday night, I had a plan. Monday morning, I walked into that break room with the shoebox under my arm, and every single person who had ever smirked at that window table was going to understand what they had actually been mocking for 11 years. I started at Hargrove Capital Management on a Tuesday in March 2011, 28 years old. My title was Compliance Associate, which sounds more important than it was. Mostly it meant I read regulatory filings until my eyes crossed, and I flagged anything that looked like it might eventually embarrass someone. I'd come from a smaller firm in Phoenix, mid-tier credentials, no particular mentor pulling strings. I got the job because I was thorough and I interviewed clean, and because the woman who was supposed to fill the position had apparently rescinded her acceptance 2 days before start date. So I arrived already knowing I was the backup plan. The office was on the 14th floor of a building in downtown Minneapolis. Glass walls, open floor plan, the kind of place where everyone can see what everyone else is doing and absolutely no one acknowledges it. There were maybe 60 people in the department I joined. They had been working together long enough to have developed their own private language, references I didn't understand, shorthand for jokes that had calcified into office lore. Within my first hour, I understood that these were people who had eaten lunch together for years and were not particularly looking for a new addition. The break room was on the south side of the floor. Big windows, 8 tables, a coffee station that was always slightly burnt. By 11:45 every day, it was already mapped. The senior analysts at the round table by the door, the client services team in the back left corner, the compliance group I technically belonged to in the center. I watched this for 3 days before I understood it wasn't just habit, it was architecture, and I was a structural element that hadn't been accounted for. On my 4th day, I took my lunch, a sandwich from the cart downstairs, a bag of chips, a bottle of water, and stood in the break room doorway for what felt like a full minute looking for somewhere to sit. Every table had someone at it. Every group was mid-conversation. I was about to take my lunch back to my desk when I heard it. "You can sit here." The man was at the table by the far window, the one slightly separated from the others, the one I'd assumed was claimed but temporarily empty. He was wearing a gray uniform, building services. His lunch was already half eaten, a wax paper sandwich and a can of orange soda, and he was reading something with the patient concentration of a person who had nowhere else to be. He looked up when I hesitated, and he said it again, simpler this time. "Sit." I sat. His name was Charles. He told me that on the 2nd day. Charles Wilson. He'd worked in that building for 19 years, which meant he had been mopping floors in the lobby while I was still in high school. He was 61 years old, had a slight limp from a knee surgery he'd never quite recovered from, and ate the same lunch every single day. One sandwich on white bread, one can of orange soda, one banana he'd save until 10 minutes before his break ended. He never explained the routine. It never needed explaining. He didn't ask me much in those first days, just small things, where I was from, whether I liked Minneapolis winters. He offered opinions only when I asked for them, which I eventually started doing, because he gave the kind of answer that was actually useful, honest, specific, without any need to make himself look good in the process. Within a week, my coworkers noticed. "Eating with your boyfriend again?" said Marcus from client services, loud enough for 4 tables to hear. He was grinning the way people grin when they're testing whether a joke will land. I laughed. I always laughed at the beginning. It was easier than explaining that the man at the window table was the only person in that building who had actually looked at me when I spoke. It continued, not constantly, not every day, but consistently enough that it became a fact about me, the way having a certain ringtone or parking in the same spot becomes a fact about a person, filed, categorized, lightly mocked. By the end of my first year, I knew the pattern. Someone would see me heading toward Charles's table and make a face. Someone would mention it at a team meeting as an aside, a throwaway comment designed to get a quiet laugh. Someone would ask me in that particular tone how my friend was doing, that particular elongation of friend that meant something else entirely. I sat with him anyway, every day, noon, same window table, same 2 chairs. Year 2, I got a promotion. Nothing dramatic. Associate to senior associate, a title change more than a role change, but it came with a modest salary bump and a seat at a quarterly meeting that had previously been above my grade. My manager, a man named Patrick Ellsworth who communicated primarily in bullet points and kept a stress ball shaped like a globe on his desk, announced it at the morning stand-up. The congratulations from my colleagues were polite and brief. They had the particular quality of people who have decided you don't quite belong and are mildly annoyed that your continued presence contradicts that assessment. At lunch that day, I went to Charles's table with a cupcake from the gas station across the street, chocolate with slightly slightly melting frosting in a single-serve plastic clamshell. I set it on the table between us without explanation. He looked at it. He looked at me. He cut it in half with a plastic knife and pushed one half back toward me, and we ate lunch. Someone walking past the break room saw us and said, loud enough to carry, "Don't forget to thank your janitor." I pretended not to hear it. Charles pretended not to hear it. We both heard it. Year 4 was harder. My marriage had been deteriorating since approximately year 2, and by spring of year 4 it was finished. My ex-husband and I signed papers in March, and I moved into an apartment 6 blocks from the office that was too quiet in a way I kept expecting to get used to. I came to work hollowed out in a way I couldn't entirely hide, the kind of tired that lives behind your eyes and makes everything you do look like a performance of a person who is fine. I told myself no one at work would notice. I was wrong about that in both directions. Some people noticed and used it, and one person noticed and didn't. A woman named Denise Hargrove had been in client services for 11 years at that point. She was efficient, socially fluent, and had the specific talent of saying things that couldn't technically be reported while still managing to land with full damage. She had opinions about everyone and delivered them at a volume calibrated for maximum audience. Not quite loud enough to quote back at her, but absolutely loud enough to be heard. She had commented on my lunch arrangements before. Little things. The janitor boyfriend line, a variation of which she'd used maybe a dozen times. The suggestion that I was doing charity work. The raised eyebrow when she passed our table. The smile to whoever she was walking with. Small cuts, consistently applied. The day the divorce was finalized, I went to the break room at noon. Divorce papers still in a manila envelope in my bag because I hadn't been home to file them yet. A woman named Denise Hargrove was standing near the coffee station when I walked in. She watched me come through the door, tracked where I was heading, and said it to the 3 people around her, pitched to carry across the room. Maybe if she spent lunch with actual professionals, her life would look different. 2 tables laughed. One person pretended to cough. Someone near the back made a small sound of agreement or acknowledgement, the reflexive social noise of a person who wants to be on the winning side of a joke they didn't fully hear. I kept walking. I sat down. He handed me half his sandwich before I'd even put down my bag. He didn't ask me anything. He just ate, and I ate, and eventually I said, "It's done." And he nodded once, the way you nod when you knew something was coming and are sorry it finally arrived. We sat there for 40 minutes that day. He didn't tell me it would get better. He didn't tell me what to do. He was just there, which was, at that point, more than most people were offering. Walking back to my desk afterward, I passed Marcus from client services, who was refilling his water bottle. He looked at me. He looked away. Neither of us said anything. I think, somewhere in that transaction, we both knew he'd laughed and I'd heard it. Nothing was going to be said about it. That was the agreement we'd silently reached 3 years in. They would say things, and I would hear them, and we would all continue to pretend none of it was happening. Year 6, I was promoted again, this time to compliance manager. A real promotion. A team under me, a private office, access to the senior leadership floor. I hired 2 analysts and restructured the filing review process, and reduced our regulatory error rate by 22% in the first quarter. I was, by any objective measure, good at my job and getting better. The commentary about my lunches didn't stop. If anything, it intensified slightly, with the particular edge that sometimes appears when people sense they were wrong about someone and refuse to acknowledge it. Denise began referring to Charles as my little janitor friendship around this time. That exact phrase, said with a particular smile, in that particular way that ensured maximum humiliation, without anything technically quotable. I'm aware I could have said something. I'm aware I could have escalated it, filed something, made noise. I thought about it. What stopped me, honestly, was that I didn't want what I had with Charles to become a document. I didn't want to explain it in HR language. What we had was simple. He was my friend. He was the first person in that building who made me feel like a human being instead of a personnel file. Turning that into evidence of workplace harassment would have made it smaller than it was. So I let it go. Year 8, I got him a good thermos for his birthday. He'd mentioned once, in passing, that his coffee was always cold by the time he got to break room. I found a vacuum-sealed one that promised to keep liquid hot for 12 hours and bought it without overthinking. He looked at it for a long time. "Charlotte," he said. He always used my full name, never Charlie, never anything shortened. "This is a very good thermos." That was the whole reaction. It was enough. Year 9, he showed up at the window table on a Tuesday with his wrist in a brace. He'd tripped in the stairwell. "Nothing serious," he said. He was back the next day. Year 10, my mother got sick. Stage 3, which became stage 4 in a way that happened faster than the doctors suggested it would, and she was gone by December. I called in sick the morning after the funeral and came back on a Thursday, because sitting in my apartment alone was worse than coming to work. I came to the break room at noon. I didn't have lunch with me. I just sat down across from Charles with nothing in my hands and stared at the table. He tore his sandwich in half and pushed it toward me without a sound. I ate. I cried a little, just the quiet kind. The kind you can almost hide if you look slightly to the right. He let me. He didn't say anything useful or useless. He was just present, and sometimes that is the entire service a person can offer. The Monday he wasn't there, I told myself he was sick. Tuesday, I told myself he was still sick. Wednesday, I called down to building services and asked if Charles was expected back, and the woman who answered said she wasn't sure, but she'd pass along my message. Thursday, Patrick Ellsworth stopped by my office doorway to mention something about a compliance deadline, and then, as he was leaving, said it the way he said things that didn't particularly matter. matter to him? Oh, that janitor, Charles. He passed away. Heart attack, I think. Over the weekend. He was already walking away before he finished the sentence. I sat at my desk for a moment after he left. Then I walked to the bathroom on the north side of the building, the single occupancy one with the lock, and I sat on the floor with my back against the door, and I couldn't breathe right for about 10 minutes. Not sobbing, just not breathing right. The way your body sometimes decides to process information before your brain is ready. The funeral was Saturday. A small chapel in St. Paul, 40 minutes from my apartment. I found the information through the obituary in the Star Tribune. 6 lines, survived by no one mentioned by name. Services at 11. I arrived at 10:45. There were maybe 14 people in the chapel. A few neighbors, I assumed. An elderly woman I later learned was a former colleague from decades ago. A pastor who clearly hadn't known him well but was trying. And me, the only person from Hargrove Capital Management who cleared a Saturday morning. Not one of my coworkers came. Not one person from that building, that break room, that floor where Charles had worked for 19 years, came to say goodbye. I sat in the second row and looked at the closed casket and felt a rage I hadn't anticipated. Clean and cold. The kind that doesn't need to do anything immediately. The kind that waits. After the service, while I was standing outside on the chapel steps not quite ready to get in my car, a man in a dark suit walked toward me with the particular directness of someone who knows exactly who they're looking for. Are you Charlotte Reeves? Yes. I'm Martin Adler. He handed me a business card. Adler and Klein Estate Law, Minneapolis, MN. I'm Mr. Wilson's attorney. He left something for you. He was already holding it. A shoebox, soft cardboard, one corner secured by a strip of yellowed tape. He held it with both hands, slightly ceremonially. He was very specific, Martin Adler said. He wanted you to receive this personally. My hands were shaking before I'd even transferred it to my own grip. I didn't open it in the parking lot. I didn't open it at home right away either. I set it on the passenger seat and drove, and I kept glancing at it, and the tape on the corner held the whole way. When I finally lifted the lid in my kitchen, I found photographs. Dozens of them. Printed on photo paper, slightly faded at the edges, organized in no particular order except they were all of me. My first day, standing in the break room doorway with my lunch bag held against my chest like a shield, an expression on my face I didn't remember feeling but clearly had. My promotion day, the cupcake photo, shot from the hallway, me and Charles at our table, me holding a plastic clamshell like it was something actually valuable. The week of my divorce, hollow-eyed, my hands around a paper coffee cup, staring slightly past Charles instead of at him. The day after my mother's funeral, the same table, the other half of a wax paper sandwich in front of me, my eyes red. 11 years, in photographs. I didn't know he had a camera. I had never seen him take a picture. He had done it quietly, from a distance, with whatever small phone he kept in his breast pocket. Not every day, not intrusively, but at the moments that mattered, the moments he thought someone should have documentation of. Under the photographs was the notebook. Small, spiral-bound, dark blue cover, the edges slightly worn where he'd opened and closed it 10,000 times. I had always assumed it was a grocery list, a maintenance log, something practical and mundane. I had assumed this for 11 years. I opened it to the first page. Charlotte smiled today. First time all week. I turned a page. Promotion day. She acted like it wasn't important. It was. Her mother is gone. Ask tomorrow if she slept. C asked about my knee today. Remembered I mentioned it 3 weeks ago. Every small moment I had assumed no one was paying attention to. The days I'd shown up relieved. The days I'd shown up depleted. The days something had gone well at work, and I'd come to the table lighter than usual, and I'd thought no one noticed. And someone had. 63 pages. 11 years of lunches, distilled into the precise observations of a man who paid attention for a living. Not because it was his job, but because that was simply how he moved through the world. I was on page 37 when I started crying. I was on page 51 when I found the letter. It was folded in thirds, my name on the front in his handwriting. Charlotte, not Charlie, the way he always said it. I unfolded it carefully, the way you handle something that can't be replaced. He wrote that he knew about every joke, every smirk, every comment Denise Hargrove had made loud enough to carry across a break room. He wrote that he'd heard all of it and that none of it had touched him. Not because he was above it, but because he understood what they were actually watching. They were watching two people eat lunch, he wrote, and they had completely misunderstood what that meant. He wrote that he had never felt the need to explain himself to people who had already decided what they were seeing. Then he wrote, "There is one more thing in this box." I turned the letter over. On the back, in the same careful handwriting, the photograph at the bottom, under the notebook. Please look at it. I set the letter down and lifted the notebook out entirely. At the very bottom of the box was a single photograph, face down. I picked it up and turned it over. A young woman, dark hair, laughing, caught mid-motion the way candid photos catch people, authentically, unguardedly. She looked like she was maybe 22, 23. She was beautiful in the specific way of someone who doesn't know they're being looked at. I almost thought it was me. The bone structure, the way she held herself. I flipped it over. On the back, in faded ink, my daughter. Just that. 2 words. I went back to the letter. He had lost her in 1993. Leukemia, diagnosed when she was 20 and gone before she was 23. He had spent the decade after her death doing the work of staying alive without any particular reason to stay alive. Showing up, working, eating his sandwich, waiting for something to feel worth continuing toward. Then I walked into that break room in March 2011 and stood in the doorway looking for someone somewhere to sit, and he looked up. He wrote that he hadn't noticed the resemblance immediately. It had developed over weeks, over months, not in appearance so much as in manner. The way she had moved through rooms she wasn't sure she belonged in. The way she had pretended things didn't sting when they clearly did. The way she had been quietly, privately delighted by small kindnesses and tried not to show it. He wrote, "I never told you because I never wanted you to feel like you were standing in for someone else. You were never a replacement. You were just Charlotte." But she was why the world felt less hollow. The last line of the letter. "Everyone thinks I gave you a seat at my table. The truth is, you gave me one." Monday morning. I parked in my usual spot. I took the elevator to 14. I walked through the office with the shoebox under my arm and I went straight to the break room. The room was half full. The early lunch crowd. People who ate at 11:45 to avoid the noon rush. Denise was near the coffee station, the way she usually was. She saw me come in and started to smirk, the beginning of whatever comment had been forming since she clocked the shoebox. I didn't look at her. I walked to the window table, Charles's table, the one that had been empty for 2 weeks and had started to quietly fill with overflow seating. And I set the box down and I opened it. "His name was Charles," I said, loud, steady, loud enough for the room to hear. "Charles Wilson. He worked in this building for 19 years, and every single one of you thought I was doing him a favor." I started laying out the photographs. The room went quiet faster than I expected. I set them out one by one on the table, not in any particular order, just placing them so they were visible. Me and my lunch bag on day 1, me and my cupcake on promotion day, the hollow-eyed divorce week, the after-funeral Tuesday. 11 years of documentation spread across a break room table. People moved closer without meaning to. Denise put down her coffee cup. Marcus from client services had his phone halfway to his pocket and stopped. I placed the notebook in the center. "He kept notes," I said. "Every lunch, for 11 years, every moment he thought someone should be paying attention to." I opened it to the first page and left it there for the room to read. "He didn't miss a single day I came to this table. Not one." Someone picked up the promotion day photo. Denise, I realized. She was looking at it. Me and Charles at our table, the plastic clamshell between us, both of us laughing at something I couldn't remember anymore, with an expression I hadn't seen on her face before, something closer to discomfort than contempt. She set it back down without a word. I hadn't planned to say more than that. I'd planned the walk-in, the table, the photographs, the notebook. I'd planned to state his name and let the evidence do the rest. But the box still had one more thing inside. I reached in and pulled out the photograph of his daughter. I set it in the middle of the table, face up, next to the open notebook. The room was very still. "He lost his daughter 30 years ago," I said. "She was 23. He came to this building every day for the 11 years I worked here, and he never told anyone. He ate his lunch at this table, and he listened, and he noticed. And you called it a joke." I looked at Denise specifically, then at Marcus, then at Patrick Ellsworth, who had materialized in the doorway at some point during the last few minutes. "You called it a joke for 11 years. No one spoke. I looked at the empty chair across from me, the one that had always been his, the one that now had a paper coffee cup left on it by someone who hadn't thought twice about it, and I picked up the cup and set it on the nearest counter. I sat down in my chair. His chair was empty across from me. I was not going to fill it. No one was going to fill it. But I was going to sit at this table at noon every day for as long as I worked in that building, and I was going to eat my lunch, and anyone who had something to say about it was going to do the math themselves." Denise left the break room first, then Marcus. The room slowly emptied around me, people drifting out in ones and twos, not talking the way they usually talked, not throwing glances over their shoulders. Patrick Ellsworth stood in the doorway for a moment after nearly everyone else had left. He started to say something. I could see it. The formation of some managerial platitude about Charles being a good man, or the firm extending its condolences or something involving the word unfortunately, and then he stopped. He looked at the photograph of the young woman in the center of the table. He looked at me. He left without saying anything. I ate my lunch alone at the window table with the photographs and the notebook spread out around me, and I looked out at the city through the glass, and I was, for the first time in 2 weeks, not angry. I think about what he wrote in the letter sometimes, the last line. "The truth is, you gave me one." I've turned it over in my mind more times than I can count, and every time I arrive at the same place, I didn't know I was doing it. I didn't know that showing up to a table every day for 11 years because it was the only table where I didn't feel like a problem was also, for someone else, a reason to keep showing up to anything. He carried the weight of that quietly, without ever asking me to carry it with him. He watched me get promoted and divorced and bereaved and promoted again, and he wrote it all down in a small notebook, and he never once made me feel like a debt he was collecting on. I went back to Martin Adler's office the following week to ask about the estate, whether there was anything I could do, whether Charles had left any wishes beyond the shoebox. There wasn't much. He'd owned a small house in St. Paul that had gone to a distant cousin he'd spoken to maybe twice in a decade. His personal effects were modest. But Martin Adler told me one more thing, the thing that sent me back to my car in a familiar state of temporary breathlessness. Charles had known about his heart for 3 years. He'd had a major episode in 2019 and been told by his cardiologist, Dr. Sandra Nkosi at Hennepin Healthcare, that the condition was serious and progressive and that he should make arrangements. He'd continued working, had, according to the building services records Martin Adler had obtained, missed only 4 days in those 3 years, one of which was a scheduled knee follow-up. He'd modified his diet slightly. He'd made arrangements with Martin Martin Adler for the shoebox and its contents, labeling everything carefully over the course of several visits, leaving specific instructions about delivery and about what to say and what not to say when he handed it over. He'd known there would come a Monday when he wasn't at the window table. He'd spent 3 years getting the box right. I thought about that on the drive home. 3 years of knowing the box existed in some drawer or closet. 3 years of adding to it occasionally. Another photo, another notebook entry, while sitting across from me at lunch and not saying a word about it. Not out of deception. Just out of the same quality that had made him the person he was. A belief that what you carry should be carried quietly, and that the moment for handing it to someone else would become clear when it arrived. Martin Adler handed me a second envelope across his desk. Inside was a gift card to the coffee cart downstairs, the one at street level, where Charles had occasionally bought us coffee when it was very cold or I'd looked particularly in need of something warm. The amount on it was $200. The note attached said only, "For future lunches." I laughed in Martin Adler's office, loud and sudden, the kind of laugh that is almost indistinguishable from crying. He handed me a tissue and waited patiently, in the manner of a man who had presided over many strange moments in the course of executing other people's wishes. I didn't explain. I don't think I needed to. I still eat at the window table. Every day, noon. The room has never made a comment about it since. Not once in the 2 years since that Monday morning. Denise transferred to another division 8 months later. She cited professional reasons, and I have no information suggesting otherwise. The table is mine in the way that things you actually earn become yours. I spent 2 months after the shoebox morning quietly working with HR and building management to get something formalized. A plaque, a notice in the building newsletter, some acknowledgement that Charles Wilson had worked here for 19 years and been a person worth mentioning. What came out of it was modest. A small framed notice near the building services office on the second floor, his name and his years of service, and a line I wrote myself that I'm still satisfied with. He noticed everything that mattered. It's not enough. It wasn't close to enough. But he taught me that most worthwhile things are like that. Not enough, but present. Not everything you wanted, but real. Not the chair across from you, but the knowledge that someone sat in it every day for 11 years and thought you were worth writing down. Every day at noon, I take my lunch to the window table. I sit in my chair. His chair is across from me, and I don't need anyone to fill it. I just eat my lunch, and the room is very quiet.